Right, well, good afternoon, everybody. We are running a fairly tight schedule in terms of what we're trying to fit into the hour and a half for this webinar on organic beef systems. So I will crack on. We are recording the session, so anybody that has missed the beginning or wants to share it later, then we'll share that round with the follow-up email. So to start with, just do a few introductions and just run through what we're going to do for the day. So we're going to start off with Angus Nelless, who farms up here in Northumberland, just giving us a bit of a case study about his farm and his system, and they're on organic sucklers. We'll then go into a bit of the detail about standards with Adrian and Annie from certification team. I'm going to cover off a brief bit about maximising your forage production and then hand over to Peter Jones talking about some organic marketing. And then the main kind of chunk at the end, we're going to do a Q&A session. So if you want to put your questions in either the chat or the Q&A function that you can see at the top of the screen there as we go, so you don't forget them. The Q&A function also gives you the opportunity to bump questions up. So if somebody else has already asked the question you want to ask, then it'll pop in there. And to start off with, I'm just going to put a poll in the chat. So when that pops up, if you can just answer it, and it just gives us an idea of where you're at with your farming system. So that should pop up in your screen in front of you. So if you just answer that, and then we will keep going with the session. So to start with, I'm going to hand over to you, Gus, to talk about the farm, if you want to take control.
Yeah. Hi. Hello, everybody. Thanks for asking us to come on today and just have a bit of a run through about what we do here at Thistleyhaugh as far as the cattle side of things go. I've just got a small presentation just to run through at the start. We'll not go into too much detail with that. It'll just give you a bit of context about where we're at with the farm and what we're doing on the farm, and then I'll maybe drill into a little bit more detail specifically on the cows and how the cows are kept and wintered, and then a little bit on the steer cattle as well. So yeah, we are yeah, you see there what we're doing at Thistleyhaugh, pretty much a 2,000 ewe flock of performance recruited clins. We also took about 500 or 600 ewe lambs. There was 310 gone to the bull this year. Cattle, we'll probably expect it, somewhere about the 270, 280 in calf for next spring as far as the cow herd. Yeah, all progenies try to finish on the farm. That's the sheep and the cattle. What will come into winter, what we don't finish, we'll sell store, but we can talk about that a little bit later on. We also have a small free-range turkey enterprise, organic turkey enterprise, doing between 12 and 1,500 birds a year. We used to do a lot more poultry than that, but yeah, cut that back quite a bit, and running about 860 hectares of good marginal land in the Crook Valley here in Northumberland. So yeah, quick history about the place. 1910 we came to Thistleyhaugh. Tells you a little bit about how we got there. Managed to purchase it in 95, and then a joining block in 2005, and then a little bit more. So yeah, we're quite I think a lot of the decisions that are made on the farm are very financially based. I mean, obviously we have a way of how we want to farm and what we want to do, but you probably see there's quite a few mortgages and debt involved in our business. So yeah, it's kept thumb screws on us and kept us thinking about, the systems and yeah, making sure that we know our cost of productions, yeah, to make all this work, hopefully. And you see there, we've been organic now since 2005. Yeah, cattle. Last spring we calved about 250 cows. We're mainly Aberdeen Angus based. We do run a Hereford bull as well. They breed black baldy cattle, which we quite like. But we are predominantly an Aberdeen Angus herd. Placement heifers are all calving down at 2. Try and finish the steers off grass at 18 to 20 months if we can at Dovecote Park. What we can't finish, we'll sell. Yeah, EBVs are quite an important part of our selection policy. That, along with animals which fit the system. So I'm not looking for high EBVs in any particular area, just specific ones, which we can talk about a little bit later as well if you want. But yeah, mainly looking for an easy-fleshed, moderate-sized cow who will cope with living outside on a fell on deferred grass all winter. Bull for 8 weeks. That date's actually changed. We moved the calving date back to the 15th of April now, and yeah, just to calve a little bit more in line with the grass. All calving's done outside. Try to do minimal assistance. So yeah, that's where we're at with them. Sheep, like I say, will fly through these couple of thousand ewes, all cleans, performance recorded. We breed 75% of the flock to breed our replacements from the bottom 25% go terminal. The sheep are lambed on Thistleyhaugh, but we have an agreement with 2 organic arable farms in the Berwickshire area where we use their fertility building lathes. So a lot of the ewes will head away with lambs at foot in May time up there, and we'll try and kill as many lambs as we possibly can off the mum. This is us. 5-member partnership. Mum isn't in that photo, but yeah, so there's my brother Duncan, myself, Zoe, Duncan's wife, Janice, my wife and mother are in the 5-member partnership, and they're the kids who are coming on, some coming into the business. This is a bit of an older photo now, so 2 of the lads are coming into business, and the girls haven't just decided whether they are or not yet. I keep thinking they will, but they tell us they're not. But I think the call of the land will eventually come to a couple of them anyway. We'll see. Yeah, so there's 4 of us full-time on the farm now. Yeah, a little bit about the turkey enterprise there. We'll do yeah, so that keeps us busy in December. They're all on the ground now as we speak. Holiday cottages run by Zoe and Janice. Yeah, so basically the principle is we're trying to move away. We'd like to continue to move away from conserved forage if we can. We can talk about how we winter the cows later. But yeah, the intention is to feed as much grazed grass as we possibly can. You know, I would love to feed 100% grazed grass and not conserve any forage at all. But yeah, I think we'll have to be realistic that in this climate in the UK, you know, to go into a winter without any conserved forage at all would be a little bit reckless. So at the minute, we're still just pushing the boundaries on it as far as stockpiling grass goes, to try and get us through without and kick the hay habit, as to say, if we possibly can. This is an example of one of the ways that we winter cows. So this is bale grazing. I think there was 100 cows in that mob. We strip graze through it, giving them access to bales every day. Them hay bales are put out at when they're made, and they're led there, and so they'll be out there from July, August, and then we'll start to use them sort of December time. Yeah, it's becoming more popular. It was a little bit of a game changer for us on the new farm that we took to Healy, as in there was no buildings with the farm, so no infrastructure really as far as that goes for housing cattle. So we wanted to increase the cattle herd and go there. We had to find a method of, you know, making it work and keeping the cows outside. So bale grazing really was quite a big part of that. I think it's been a really useful stepping stone for us in developing a system which is moving towards more stockpiled grass. The bale grazing gives us the opportunity to feed conserved hay at times of year when it's either we want to keep off that ground or just give us a bit longer into the shoulders of the winter, either end of the winter. So yeah, as we move more to winter grazing, you know, it's really important for us to have good soil armour, because there's some not very good examples of outwintering cattle and outwintering cows, and I think there's a lot of negativity about it within the industry, and rightly so, because there is some times when you look at it and it's not great. You know, mud, cattle in mud, clots, and you know, destroying soil. So yeah, we have to be very careful that if we're going to do it, we'll do it right. So, you know, I'm not going to say that we started out wintering in 2017 and I'm not going to say that there's never been any mistakes, because there's been poor field choices and that. But, you know, I think as long as you have a plan B and C and sometimes D, you know, you can get around it. You've just got to be careful not to go all guns blazing into it without a contingency plan. We did try to do winter crop for our wintering, as in fodder beet and kale and that, but we've moved away from it. You know, it was just on our ground, although we don't get high rainfall, we are quite heavy. Yeah, it just wasn't very pleasant to look at. And I thought, if I'd thought it wasn't very pleasant to look at, then, you know, the perception for the general public, in my eyes, wasn't great either. So yeah, we've definitely tried to move away from that, and we are, yeah, using a lot more stockpile grazing and leaving plenty armour on it, so that they can, you know, they're not making a mark on there. Long-term goals, yeah, to discover if we can run the farm business in line with the maximum sustainable output principles. This is based on finding out what the land and farm is capable of within its enclosed self. Obviously, you can see the kids there. We want to implement a smooth succession plan and stay fit and well to enjoy retirement one day. Yeah. So I'll give you back control then now, Tabitha, and I'll just explain a little bit more about the basis of the how we run the cow herd. So it's a closed herd. We've talked about that. The replacement policy is we keep our own heifers. We bull an awful lot of more heifers than what we need for 6 weeks. Heifer calves are outwintered as well, to sort of bring them in line with the system that they're gonna have to be used to as a cow. But they will be on deferred grass along with silage, bale grazing. Yeah, we don't get big growth rates through the winter on them. It's important that we get them onto rotation as soon as possible when spring arrives. So they're not very heavy, so you can, you know, and they don't need high covers of grass at that stage. They just need good quality grass. Through the winter, if we're growing at 0.2 to 0.3 kilograms a day, we're quite happy with that. But like I say, it relies on us getting onto rotation really fast, so that we can lift the heifer growth rates up to 1 kilo and above ready for bulling on 10th of July. And we're not working with a heavy cow, so the cow's only about 600 kilograms, so we'll get away quite easily with 340, 350 kilogram bulling weights on the heifers, and then we'll keep them going nicely all summer on rotation to try and make catch up, so they go into the winter in decent condition for that. Like I say, closed herd since 2006, when we moved away from continental cattle to more native systems. As far as the cows go, obviously you've seen the wintering system through the summer. The cows are multi-sire mated. We're not a ring-fenced farm, so we have basically 3 to 4 bulling groups spread over the 3 farms. There'll be a mob of 85 heifers with 2 bulls. There's a mob of 125 cows with 3 bulls, and then another mob with 3 bulls. So yeah, they're usually on 1 to 2 day shifts through the summer. And that, if we were a ring fence farm, we would probably be running bigger mobs, but limited by the actual farm size, so we're not transporting animals in trailers back and forward throughout the summer. We'll try and get the mob sizes right for that particular farm. we like to get have as fewer mobs as possible, really, because we found that if we have too many mobs, it makes it really difficult to build up covers for then to have stockpile grass in the winter. So the fewer mobs we have running through the summer, the easier it makes us to grow covers for winter grazing. As far as the steers go, the steers are weaned and wintered inside, and they are wintered on an arable silage, grass silage, all from the pit. They don't get any we don't feed any concentrates to the sheep or the cattle, so the steers are try and give them decent quality silage, grow them at about 0.5 kilo a day through the winter, and then again get them onto as early a turnout as possible. And at present they are on daily shifts on the better ground at Thistleyhaugh, trying to grow them at 1 kilo plus a day to look to start and slaughter them at 18 months old come late September, sorry, and into October and November. And what isn't finished by November, we will sell store and not take them through the next winter. The steers give us quite a bit of flexibility on stocking rate and stocking density, because they are a movable feast. We could sell them as and when we want to, if we think we're running out of food, or if we think that we're going into the winter with not enough covers, we'll just move the steers on as and when we deem necessary. We're not fixed to any rigid system with them, other than just trying to get them grow as well as we possibly can through the summer when we can. But again, we do try and be very flexible with them. They are our trading stock, because pretty much everything else is our capital stock, so required for the breeding flock or herd. But yeah, it's a similar approach with the finishing lambs, as in we will try and finish as many as we possibly can off grass. But again, come late summer, we don't intend to have very many lambs at all, other than the potential the replacement breeding stock left on the farm. Yeah, so this whole system has been developed over, well, since the early 2000s, really, and it's based on the interest in this type of system that Duncan and I had on a forage-based system and getting the genetics to fit it. We have a real importance on knowing our cost of production and margins on both the sheep and the cattle, and they drive decisions. And I suppose looking at the cost of production has driven us down the road of trying to make a cow profitable, and realizing that the overheads and fixed costs involved in running a suckler herd were making it virtually impossible for us to make them profitable above subsidy, which was always the ultimate goal. So yeah, they are the key drivers for us. And I'll probably finish there, Tabitha, and any questions later on, that would be great.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Gus. It's always, obviously, I've heard you talk about the system quite a lot, but I always pick up different things each time I hear it. So as Gus said, we're going to do the Q&A at the end. So if you've come up with any questions while we've been going, please do put them in the chat or in the Q&A function at the top of your screens. I'm going to share the presentation again and hand over to Adrian and Annie, that you can see on your screens now, that are part of our certification team. The cert team have only just gained Adrian from us, so he spends a lot of time between a few different teams making sure that we're all joined up together, which is very handy. So I will share this presentation again, and I think we're starting with you, aren't we, Adrian?
Yes, thanks very much. And that was a really interesting description of your farming, Angus. So I've got lots of questions I need to ask you, even if no one else does, as a consequence of that. So I'm an organic farmer. I've had a different challenge with my farm in terms of beef, in the sense that it was an arable farm and we were bringing in livestock, and the capitalisation issue about buying in sucklers meant that we took a different path, but I'll talk about that later. For now, so I work for Soil Association Charity and the certification team, looking at supply chain issues, issues around the moment small abattoirs, the suspension of the SFI scheme, drought, and so on. I work closely now with the certification officers, and I'm really pleased to introduce Annie Crook, who's going to talk through the processes involved in certification, some of the rules and regs, and also just the approachability that the team has developed to help through the process of converting to or working within the organic standards. So if I can just hand over to Annie now, and then I'll re-emerge later. Thanks.
That's great. Thanks, Adrian. So I'm Annie Crook. I'm a certification officer for Soil Association certification, and my job is to work directly with farmers converting and those who are certified, and there to answer any questions that anyone has to do with certification. So today I'm going to give an overview on what it means to be organically certified. We don't have time to cover everything, of course, so this is just a snapshot really of certification, focusing on beef systems. And if you do have any other questions or anything more specific you'd like to ask, then please ask that at the end during the Q&A. So firstly, let's talk about who are Soil Association certification. We're the leading and largest certification body in the UK, and we certify businesses all across the supply chain, from food processors to abattoirs to butchers, and we certify 90% of all the organic products in the country. We also certify half of organic land, and we're working with nearly 2,000 farmers. And just to provide a little bit of context, in the UK, the organic standards are currently based on the retained version of the EU organic regulation, which has been adapted post-Brexit UK law. So there are standards that are baseline standards, and then the Soil Association also has its own private standards, which go above and beyond the legal minimum standards. And we have these particularly in areas of animal welfare, which I'm going to go and talk about more later. But a thing to consider and remember about organic certification with the Soil Association is that it can't be undercut by equivalents, because the standards are provided at a level of quality that can't be competed with, unlike, say, the conventional situation we have now where imports may compromise the UK meat market. So Soil Association comes with a stamp that you can see there. It comes with a really strong reputation, and retailers know it and they trust our produce. Also, being Soil Association certified means you'll be part of a community of like-minded farmers with the same aims and the same goals. And I'm going to first talk about the conversion process. I'm aware we have already certified licensees on this call, but some of you might be interested in how it works. So I'm going to try and summarize it here. So the term conversion, that's the way in which we described a transition from non-organic to organic. And as a standard, it takes 2 years to convert land to organic, but we can reduce this in some cases by 4 months where it's evidence that no inputs have been used on the land. And then in some specific scenarios, we can reduce it by 1 year as approved by DEFRA when you have been under a government scheme detailing no artificial inputs. So depending on the length of time of conversion, whether that be 2 years, 20 months or 12 months, there are some different routes on converting the livestock along with the land. And a higher standard for the Soil Association is that organic animals should be organic for as close to their whole lives as possible. So an important thing to understand is any non-organic livestock that are currently on farm, they won't be able to convert to organic. However, the breeding females can be converted to what's called converted breeding stock, meaning their offspring can become organic. And then those animals thereafter, they can be organic. So if you follow full organic standards for your animals during the standard 2 year period, then any calves that are born to mothers that have been managed organically for at least 12 weeks before calving, they can be considered as organic once your land finishes conversion. So you can build up a herd of organic animals throughout your conversion. For example, if you are spring calving, then you might want to start your conversion in January. And then once you finish conversion, you'd have at least 2 herds of offspring that you could sell as organic once the conversion period is over. Another option is to wait until later on in the conversion or until it's finished before following organic standards, and that might save you money on feed. And you can also build up your non-organic herd during this time. So bringing in non-organic animals to grow the herd, but as I said, it's only the breeding animals that can become converted breeding stock and produce organic offspring. So next I'm going to move on to talking about some specific standards. As I said, we can't cover everything. This I'm going to focus more on livestock and some particular areas such as health and welfare. There are obvious standards to organic farming that I'm not going to cover, such as mineral nitrogen fertilizers can't be used, and valuing and making good use of your manures. But if you have any questions specific to those, please ask at the Q&A at the end. Great. But as I said earlier, health and welfare. So health and welfare is a priority for the Soil Association. We have higher standards for this compared to other certification bodies. And organic farmers are to focus on preventative practices rather than cure, and create a whole system and holistic approach which considers all aspects of health and welfare. So in our standards, if veterinary treatments are required, they must be essential for welfare reasons and also justified with a veterinary recommendation. Although we find, generally speaking, antibiotic use is low within organic farming, when it is required, we do have some restrictions, and some antibiotics can't be used compared to in conventional systems. Also, routine treatments such as wormers aren't allowed, but if they are needed, we just need some justification, such as fecal egg counts. But we do understand that sometimes animals do need to be treated, of course, and health and welfare is the priority. So that's fine if an animal has to be treated. It just might result in the animal itself not being able to be sold as organic. Some vets are really, really good at understanding what's required from organic standards, and we work with vets, and the dialogue between them is really important. So if you're able to create this good relationship with your vet, then it can be really incredibly helpful to adapting your system. And alongside that, we require an annual health plan be completed, and this can be built up alongside your red tractor herd health plan. So it's very similar. So if you're already doing that, you're already kind of one step closer, and you're already implementing those things. And another part of health and welfare with the Soil Association is at inspections. We will carry out a welfare outcome assessment. With your red tractor inspection, they already should be carrying out a welfare outcome assessment, but we will be looking at sampling 20 cows instead of the 10 that is expected from red tractor inspections. And then the final thing I'm going to mention in terms of health and welfare is we discourage long transport times, and the abattoir that the animal goes to must be certified. But we do, we know about the crisis in the abattoir sector, and it's something that we're quite concerned about, and we also do a lot of lobbying on, which Adrian has been a big part of. So if anyone has any questions about that, he can talk about that in more detail. But to support this, we do have what's called a local abattoir scheme. So it allows you to add a local abattoir that isn't certified to your licence. And so we do support this. So please get in touch if you have any questions about this. I'm next going to touch on grazing. So as explained earlier, grazing is an instrumental part of an organic system, and it is going to be talked about later on. during the webinar, but still linked to health and welfare. At the Soil Association, we believe that all animals should be given the freedom to roam and graze on pasture whenever conditions allow, just to give the animals the opportunity to express their natural behaviours. And stocking densities in organic systems are based on complying with not exceeding 170 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare per year. Now, moving on to housing, we understand that based on your soil type and other factors, it isn't always possible to keep the animals outside all of the time. So you may house your animals when the land is unsuitable and when the weather conditions might risk their welfare. But management should be aimed towards keeping the animals staying outside and grazing for as long as possible. And organic beef systems, they're not feedlot systems. They're designed to ensure the natural behaviours of the animals are met. So when housing, there are some things that need to be considered. So do they have enough light? Are they comfortable? Is there enough space to allow freedom of movement? And at least half of the space within the housing must be solid and it mustn't be slatted floor. The resting area that they have in their house, it must be dry, and the bedding that's used must be straw or another kind of equivalent natural bedding, such as sawdust or sand. And that's something that we are interested in for welfare reasons, as we have had cases of some bedding causing abrasions or hair loss patches, and that will be picked up during the welfare outcome assessments. In organic farming, your muck and your straw is a valuable resource. The final thing that I was going to mention about housing is the space requirements are more than conventional. So they're quite a bit larger than red tractor for fattening animals. So it's around sort of 3 meters square per head more in organic than required for red tractor. So it's just worth thinking about that in terms of amount of animals and stocking densities. And moving on to feed now. So the aim of organic farming is ideally a closed system where food for the animals is produced on the same farm that the animals are reared on. We understand this isn't always possible, so when feed is required and it needs to be brought in, it just must be organic ingredients, including not genetically modified. All organically certified feed should naturally be genetically modified free, but it's just worth considering. And at the Soil Association, we stipulate a minimum of 60% forage to 40% concentrate ratio. We find this standard is less of a problem in beef systems. It's normally dairy systems that we can have challenges pop up for certain breeds, like the Guernsey or Jersey, where they struggle to meet it at the highest point of their lactation curve. But just important to remember that 60% minimum forage ratio of their daily diet. And so providing a variation in the sward, it's going to help with overall health, provide better metabolic balance. But when animals are suffering from metabolic imbalance, mineral supplementation and bolusing is allowed, but it's important to be aware we need correct justification for this, and blood analysis and forage analysis, including a management plan, is what's required. I'm going to move on to derogations now. So if you're an organic farmer, you will have heard this term before, but if you're not, you might not be familiar with it. And in organic farming, a derogation means a temporary exception or exemption from the usual rules set out by the organic regulations. And we have 3 situations where you can seek permission to use non-organic when organic isn't available, and that's for livestock, seed and feed. The process of getting a derogation, it's a practical process, so if you need one, please do not hesitate to reach out and talk to us. But in a nutshell, for seed, we have a central database that you can search for organic seed suppliers, but if you're unable to source organic with the adequate justification, we're able to provide a seed derogation for you to purchase non-organic. We also allow 70% seed mixes for herbal leys, such as Cotswold seeds, for example. And then talking about livestock, you can bring in non-organic breeding animals in small numbers with justification. This is 10% of your existing herd, which can be approved by us, or we can approve up to 40% non-organic animals with approval from DEFRA. And just to think about bringing in animals and non-organic animals, we give preference to indigenous breeds and those that are suitable to your local conditions. And then finally, a really topical one that wanted to make sure that we mentioned today is feed. So of course you're all struggling and aware of the drought that's happening at the moment. So in circumstances out of your control, such as fire or extreme weather, this picture is of a field fire in Worcestershire, which happened earlier this year. We can allow a derogation, permission from DEFRA to use non-organic feed. So there are things that we need from you, information that we need to be able to grant this. I can go into that in more details in the Q&A if that's required, but in a nutshell, we'll send you a form to fill out. You fill out the details and then we send it on to DEFRA, and generally at the moment it's taking with a response time within about a week to hear back whether that's been approved. And yeah, just on that, we're really here to help and support you. Please do pick up the phone if you have any concerns about your feed. We know it is really worrying everyone at the moment, so we're here to just guide and support you along the way. And then just finally to talk about some inspection practicalities. So you have an annual inspection each year. You might get the same inspector up to 3 years in a row. And we also provide red tractor and pasture for life bolt-ons. So some of our inspectors are trained in these areas too, and that just means that you can coordinate up your inspections and you don't need multiple inspections in the year. And then record keeping, you'll need to keep records of receipts, invoices, yield records, all the usual stuff, and as you would for your other inspections, so we can carry out audits. And just to let you know, we have a lot of information on our website, a lot of resources. So please go and have a look. We have a lot of things on there. But again, we're really friendly, passionate people. We're here to help. So just pick up the phone and give us a call. And get in touch with us. And of course, if you've got any questions, please ask at the end of in the Q&A. So back to you, Adrian.
Great, thanks very much, Annie. That was very, very comprehensive and well done. Thank you. I have to say, I think I had about 100 inspections with my own farm and share farms, not just the Soil Association, but also other certifiers. And the process, is actually a very good one at focusing your mind and helping with your planning, and also just to a certain extent even benchmarking. And I think that there's an opportunity within this process to improve metric gathering, which could also give access potentially to other funding streams in time. So I would say that also one of the things you will need to do is just be aware that it is a regulated, legally defined production process, but there's flexibility within that for exceptional circumstances. In particular, say this year with the drought, they termed catastrophic circumstances, and obviously that depends on which part of the country you're in at the moment as to how seriously you're feeling that. But one thing not to do is kind of stew and just get on the phone and talk to certification and work through the process with them. And they are very approachable, very friendly group, and so I would definitely say that. Just some more couple of sort of general points about going into organic. Obviously, everyone's got different starting points and different objectives, and it was great to see some objectives really clearly articulated in Angus's presentation, because it is always important to keep a focus on what you're trying to do and to achieve, and what can be achieved within your own holding can take you by surprise. So, for instance, maize does not feature in organic beef production, as far as I'm aware, in any shape or form. Compared to explorations around herbal lays of chicory, red clover, deep rooting, more drought resistant plants, which also can dig up and bring to the surface a greater array of nutrients and minerals, which also then leads to good welfare outcomes for the livestock. I think also the other thing that's particularly important about beef, or can be in a situation in a lowland setting where you're maybe rotating, is the value of muck, and the importance of livestock and being part of a natural regenerative process to restore organic matter into soils, to improve the resilience of your farm to shock, and also, in a sense, life attracts life, and you bring in more biodiversity without a doubt when you start integrating livestock into your system. I think that the idea of networks is something which is also very much what Soil Association is about, and the producer support team has done huge amounts of work over the years with innovative farmers. Now the Adopt programme, knowledge transfer has been a key function of all the producer groups that have been set up that I've been involved with over a long period of time, and there's a huge amount of experience and assistance around. So I'm very pleased to now be able to not introduce, hand back to Tabitha, who's very much a key part in our producer support team around farm advice, specialising in particular around this area of livestock farming. So I'll hand back to you, Tabitha.
Thanks, Adrian. And yeah, great introduction there for the whole next 10 minutes that I'm going to present on. So kind of talking about opportunities to maximise forage production, but this is kind of, I'm just not fully going over, but going into some bit more detail on a lot of the stuff that Annie said and that Angus has said and that Adrian said there as well. So I've broken it up a little bit into a few different stages. So talking a little bit about your soils and your organic matter, and then going into grazing systems. So when I'm talking about forage production here, I am thinking mostly about how you're grazing it and what you need to consider to make the most of your grazing. But that equally works well in terms of conserving forage, and certainly that soil stuff works for your conserved forage as well. And it's also important to remember that if you're not already implementing a managed grazing system, so something like rotations, then you don't need to jump in whole hog. If you've got your fields that you're conserving forage from, you can keep them managed the way you currently manage them, and start just with some of your bigger fields that you're grazing and start splitting them, and you'll start to see benefit. So it is really a system that you can build, you can get your confidence, or even with how much you can invest at a time, because there is various infrastructure kind of aspects to moving towards a more managed system that have to be considered. But I'll go into those in a little bit more detail in a minute. So starting off with soil structure. This has a big impact on, if your soil structure isn't right, you're going to struggle with your grazing in terms of quantity and quality. You might have issues with flooding or compaction. So really, you have to start with your soils. You need to have a look at what's there. Soil structure is one that you can do yourself at home. You don't need to send off any tests, as long as you've got a spade. And I mean, in this image, we're using a bit of plastic, but you don't even need to use that. You can it's just a good option there, so you don't lose your worms back into the soil before you've counted them. There is full details on how to do this, including videos on the likes of the HDB website, or there's various resources. If you just put visual evaluation of soil structure into Google, you'll get all sorts up. But basically what you're looking at is whether you've got any compaction there, whether you've got any panning, so anything that's limiting either your water flow or your root flow. And you can see that by digging out a chunk of the soil, and then you've got 3 cut edges, and you have like a rough edge, and you can look at that soil profile. You can see how deep your roots are going. there's also, you can use your other sensors. So how does it smell? Like a healthy soil smells healthy. If there is issues with your soil, if there's lack of oxygen getting down into it and stuff, it does start to smell quite sulfury, which is not what you want. So you don't all have to go home or go outside and start sniffing your soils, but it does give you an indication. So there is the kind of the 4 bullet points there under soil structure is what the kind of is the general grading, but all of the resources in terms of doing this will give you more of a description on there and help you decide where it sits. But I think a lot of you will recognise a very compact soil, certainly if you look at it. So once you've established what your soil is like, and there's we have got more resources about how to do it and where to do it and stuff. But once you've established what your soil structure is like, then there's a few options, particularly if you're kind of looking at conversion or in a conversion period. It's really worth getting these sort of things going before you're into your organic system. So there is some correction options there that are all about like lifting the soil or aerating it and things, ploughing if that's something that you're able to do on your farm. Personally, I'm up on Adrian's wall here. Because of the archaeology, we are not allowed to plough. So you have to look and consider what's going to work best for your farm. There is some options in terms of prevention and stuff. Obviously, avoiding compaction, number one, but not always as easy as said as done. But certainly things like making sure that you're careful where the livestock go, or the intensity of the grazing in wet weather. So often livestock compaction is referred to as capping. So it can just create this layer that the water's not going through and you get a lot of runoff, which obviously you want to avoid. Taking the time to make sure all your drainage is good, particularly if you're thinking about starting to implement a new system. You don't want to have got a load of new fences and boundaries up and stuff to find out that actually with a drain running right through all of them is shot. So it's worth just taking the time to consider that. And then really building in, and I know Adrian just mentioned this now, different species and some of the deep rooting species into your swards. So some farms will have some naturally occurring species, and sometimes you'll have to add them in. But we will talk about those a little bit more in a minute. The next kind of stage in terms of your soil health is thinking about that soil organic matter. So you can do tests, and I think Colleen's just handily put some in the chat for the resources in terms of getting soil samples done and things to look at your organic matter in your soils. But building them is only positive, so different ways to do that. Obviously, you've got your farmyard manure if you're doing any housing. The benefit of this is really maximised if you can compost. So if you can set up a good composting system, it can increase your soil organic matter a lot quicker, but obviously there is a bit more management there. But it is an option, and it can improve the benefit you get from that farmyard manure, which is obviously quite a valuable asset. You can do green compost and digestate, but there is rules that apply to that in terms of the kind of the feedstock for those. Have they come from an organic system? Are they from your own organic system? That sort of thing to consider. And then in terms of building soil organic matter, one of the things we're really looking at is your grazing methods. Angus's example at the beginning really talked about that sort of thing, the different layers you've got, the different kind of the way you're grazing it, how many residuals you're leaving behind. And some of the species and stuff that go into that also have an impact. So there's lots of things to think about, but obviously we need to utilise all of these methods to get the maximum quality from our forage and quantity when we haven't got the option for any inorganic fertilisers. So I'm going to go a little bit more into focus on the grazing systems. I've broken it down here a little bit. I've got monitoring first, partly from a baselining point of view. So I think it's quite important to know where you are now. And then it gives you this opportunity to plan a little bit. If you're about to change your system, it's always good to know that you're improving, or in fact, if you're not improving. Obviously, there's some weather impacts and stuff, but you don't want to have spent a lot of time changing the system and actually not know whether you're any better off than you were. So one of the really simple ways for monitoring your grazing is just a very simple sward stick. So I don't know if any of you can see my picture on the camera. These are sward sticks. Most of them you can get them for free. There's a Barenberg one that's split into dairy, beef and sheep, but it actually gives you on the back of this one the ins and outs for how much grass you need for going in and out. It's just a one to work off, but it gives you that kind of help. There's an HDB one that has spring and summer on one side and autumn winter on the other. There is also a clover one from HDB that's based on images rather than measuring, that gives you an idea of that. So a lot of these sward sticks are very grass lay based, so they've all kind of originally were developed in terms of like dairy systems and perennial ryegrass, but they do give you an idea, and just measuring the height gives you something to work from. I think they have made a sward stick for kind of herbal lace for a really mixed sward, because obviously it's giving you a bit, the height isn't your main part always on that, and there's a lot of variation. So if you've got one and you've never used it, using like a clipboard or a catalogue, you just lightly compress your grass with that. So just pop that on top of your grass, and it helps for, you can see in this image, there's some quite stalky bits where things are going to seed and stuff in this image. It just compresses those a little bit, and then you're measuring up to the height of that clipboard, and that's your measurement. And again, quite easy to do. You can go out when you're checking stock, if you're moving stock, and it just helps you with that planning. There's other tools that you can use to help. There's a website called Grass Check GB that uses information from right across the country, as well as weather information, to help model and give you an opportunity to kind of see which way things are going. I know if anybody wants to ask him about it, I know Gus and his brother use Farm Max on their farm, and that's a really intense level of managing your dry matter and whether you've got enough for your stock and things like that. So there's lots of different levels to it, but a sward stick is a really easy place to start. So if you're implementing a more managed grazing system, so you're implementing rotation and you're just coming to it now, there's a few things to consider in terms of your infrastructure. So fencing being the really obvious one, but it doesn't all have to be temporary electric. Obviously that can get quite tedious to manage and move about and deal with. So it's worth looking at things like whether you could put more permanent boundaries into your fields if you've got big fields that don't need to be as big as they are, if you're not kind of rotating with arable or anything, if this is just a livestock in those fields. And when you're thinking about adding permanent boundaries, is this somewhere that you could add a hedge to get more shade and shelter? Do you want to put some trees in this line? And things like that. So that gives obviously lots of benefits as well. The shade and shelter, there is a nutritional benefit potentially, depending on what trees you decide to put in there, what species. So in terms of, like we've been talking earlier, in terms of minerals, mixed swards and kind of your herbal lays can help a lot with that as well. They can kind of drag up a lot of stuff from the soils that maybe your grasses aren't. But there's also various tree species that have quite a lot of benefit in terms of their nutritional value for livestock. So you could think about starting incorporating that sort of thing into your boundaries as well. Water, particularly with cattle, is the big thing. And obviously you need to have an ample water supply in all of your paddocks. So that could be draggable troughs that move. We've actually just set up a system here at home. We've got quite a rough bit of ground that rushes and things are starting to get quite, or always have been quite prominent in. So we've split the whole hill a couple of years ago with permanent fence. We've now put permanent electric in to split it a bit more, and then we're putting temporary electric onto that permanent, and we've got a drag trough that is moving around with an overground pipe with the cattle, and that's using the cattle as more of a kind of slightly conservation graze sort of thing to just manage some of those more invasive species a little bit as they go around. So there's lots of options there. So that one's kind of more about managing the ground. They're the suckler cows, they just need the maintenance. So it's thinking about that sort of thing. In terms of rotating, particularly cattle in this situation, or using them for that sort of management, there is collars available. There's a couple of different brands that in the collars now, but that kind of no fence collar. And basically just putting virtual fences in. So obviously it's a higher financial or a longer term financial commitment if you're going for a collar, because I think they all have subscriptions. You can purchase the device and then you're paying a subscription for the access to your virtual maps and stuff. But it is something you consider, particularly if you're in that conservation sort of side of things, or it's not ground that you can or want to put a lot of fencing on. The next bit I'll whiz through in terms of equipment is things like handling, particularly if you're setting up a new bit of ground for cattle, thinking about how you're handling them if they're going to be there for quite a long time, or you can't walk them there from your main yard. I think it's really important to consider putting in a safe handling system. You can get lots of stuff secondhand, but it is also normally incorporated when there's grants and things for grazing. This is just a few pictures of some of those things I've mentioned. So you've got a couple of different electric fencing setups. The cattle in this picture do have collars on. I'm not sure if you can actually see it very clearly from this point, but they're being used to manage a bit of hill. And that's just a really nice cattle handling system that's set up there. So species of interest, I'll just whiz through. I'm actually the only one that's going over at this point, so apologies for that. When you're looking at adding more species to your grazing, or if you're thinking about reseeding something, it's really worth considering what seeds you're going in there. I think you should be thinking about it rather than just chucking in a general mix that's available. A lot of the companies either have mixes designed for different ground types. So I know like Cotswold, for example, have a heavy ground mix. So they've already considered a little bit for you what species will work well. But you can see there's a list there of species that are deep rooting and good for drought resistance. There's ones that are good for fertility. There's some with antibiotic properties, which again, really interesting to consider, particularly in an organic setting when you're trying to minimise any other product use. So again, there's lots more details about these online, and we can answer some more questions about them if you want, but I think it's just to be considerate and not just going for diversity's sake, but looking at what your species will survive well on your farm, but also what they're going to give you. There is a few indicator species in terms of some of the issues. So some of these you'll already know about or will have been flagged by doing something like looking at your soil structure. But also if you're kind of looking at a bit of ground or thinking about a new bit of ground or how you're going to manage it, then these will indicate what issues you maybe need to deal with through that management. And again, as Adrian said, or as Annie and Adrian said, you need to be very into the planning on this system and how you can manage things. We don't want to be having to treat everything. We're aiming for prevention. So some of these things, they might already be there, but you need to start managing out of them now rather than getting to 3 years down the line, you're certified organic, and then suddenly you've got a lot of weed problems. It's all about your management. So this, I think, is almost my last slide. I've got one more after this. This is just some examples of different rotational systems. They all have slightly different targets and slightly different infrastructure needs, or kind of the level of intensity. So it builds as it goes across. But basically, just splitting a field in half and moving between the halves, you can get 20% more forage. So you don't need to go as intense as this if it looks like too much or you're not ready for that, but you can get benefits just from giving that a bit more of a rest period. And then depending on what you're aiming for, whether you're trying to finish, whether you're trying to build soil organic matter, you can kind of pick your system that works best for that. So these are just a few of the benefits that I think have been mentioned basically all the way through. So I'm going to stop talking now and hand over to Peter to talk a little bit about marketing. But do remember, if you've got any questions, please pop them in the Q&A or the chat and we'll come to them at the end. Thank you very much. Stop sharing. Peter, are you there? There we go. Oh, I just need to unmute Peter. There we go.
I'm here. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Tabitha, for asking us to join this very worthwhile meeting. Organic beef production. I really could talk all day about this because it's something that occupies most parts of my working life. But just to introduce myself, I'm Peter Jones. I'm an executive director of OLMC, the Organic Livestock Marketing Cooperative, and I run my own non-organic business, Peter Jones Livestock. As far as OLMC are concerned, we are a farmers cooperative. We were established 25 years ago by a group of farmers that wanted to market their initially finished stock together to give them a marketing advantage to abattoirs. And that has grown over the years to us marketing store cattle and lambs, fat lambs and store lambs, and breeding cattle and breeding sheep. And we would typically market 6,000 or 7,000 organic cattle of one sort or another a year. What I want to talk about really is firstly to talk about marketing finished cattle and both UTMs under 30 months and over 30 months cattle. I want to talk about marketing store cattle and opportunities there. And I briefly want to talk about the growing dairy bred organic beef, which I think we're going to find will be a growing part of organic beef production. But I think this is, as Tabitha has said, I think this is a subject in itself that probably wants discussing in more detail. There's a few things I would say that everything that I'm talking about, and indeed everything we're talking about, is principally a forage-based production system. That's what organics is, in my view, principally all about. Secondly, to say that everything I say really is, I'm making generalizations, and I realise that farming, particularly organic farming, is not a black and white science. There's all sorts of variables that are sometimes ruled by soil type, by the weather, by financials, and all sorts of other things, labour availability. So I'm making generalisations. And just finally say, by way of my introduction, and I can hardly not say this really in the current climate, that in the last 2 years, particularly in the last 12 months, we've seen a massive change in the dynamics of beef production, in the rise of beef prices, and that's obviously knocks on to the rise in store cattle prices. And this has made things far more economically viable than they ever were. For example, dairy bred organic beef production was really, up until 12 months ago, barely viable. It's changed the whole dynamics of things. There were a lot of suppler herds that were becoming unviable, and obviously this rise in prices is making them viable, and I believe is giving the opportunity of farmers to increase their size of their suppler herds, or indeed starting suppler herds. And it's also put money back into farming that was taken out with the demise of the single farm payment. So I think these things, these financials, do need bearing in mind the whole viability of organic beef production. Just to start off then, the sort of fat cattle marketing, or finished cattle marketing, which is a more fashionable way of putting it. just to talk briefly about the size of the market, there are something like 20,000 finished organic cattle processed every year. And it is tiny compared to the conventional sector. I mean, when you consider that we kill 38,000 clean cattle a week in the conventional sector, and we're killing 20,000 organic cattle per year in the organic sector, it gives you an idea of the sort of scale of things. There would also be a similar number of over 30-month cattle processed every year, something like 20,000. A lot of those are locked to the organic market, because the greater majority of those tend to be organic dairy cattle, and the logistics and the economics of getting groups of dairy bred organic cows, over 30-month cows together, is difficult. I mean, we do market them and we manage to get them together in some areas, but it is difficult. I mentioned earlier about the increase in prices, and I'm using generalizations here, but it just gives everybody an idea of where we're at in prices. The organic finished stock price, as a generalization, is something like 12 or 13% over and above the conventional price. So assuming at the moment the AHDB R4L price is around 6.35, then you would expect to get, on a generalization, about 80 pence more. That's 12 or 13% more. But I emphasize it's a generalization. It varies throughout the year. Sometimes it's 50 pence more than the conventional trade. Sometimes it's over £1 more than the conventional trade. So big variations, but I think we're right to assume it's, generally speaking, around 12 or 13% above the conventional trade. And the same with cows, really. That is sort of less of a premium. Looking over the last 12 months, the organic cow price, the over 30-month price, has been about 12 or 15 pence higher than the conventional price. At the moment, I mean, it's not difficult to get £5.55 for conventional barren cows at the moment, but organically you could easily get over £6. So just at the moment it's more like a 50 pence advantage. Within OLMC, and I think it is a reasonable and accurate reflection of what's going on with the organic beef producers, 90% of what we market, both as stores and at finished cattle, are native bred cattle to some degree. So I'm talking about Angus's, North Devons, South Devons, stabilisers, Lincoln Reds, Red Poles. So they would be either completely native bred or they would be half native bred. So it may be that there could be Angus's on continental cows or Herefords on continental cows, but the fact is that 90% of what we produce is by native bred bulls, and that is for very obvious reasons, that these are what's classified as early maturing cattle, and they perform well on high forage diets, unlike the continental bred cattle that are what's classified as late maturing cattle and thrive on a high concentrate diet. Just to talk a bit about what we're producing in the conventional trade, and this is just to give you sort of a comparison really. In the conventional trade, the industry standard, if you like, is an R4L. That's an R grade 4L fat cover, producing carcasses between 280 and 400 kilos in about 24 months. In the conventional sector, in the organic sector, which reflects the fact that it's a largely forage-based system and reflects the fact that we're using largely native bred breeds, you know, we would typically be producing carcasses that would be 270 to 350 kilos. And looking through the cattle that OLMC market, the average finishing time would be 28, 29 months. again, I emphasize these are all generalizations. But the point really of this is that even though we're using native bred cattle that grade slightly poorer than continental cattle, it is important to remember that getting cattle properly finished, not over lean, not over fat, well finished on good quality finishing rations, which doesn't mean loads of concentrates. It can be cattle finished out of grass in the summer. It can be cattle finished on a forage-based finishing ration. It is important that we get the product right at the end and produce what the market is looking for. Just moving on to the product really that we've got, that we're producing, the bovines that we're producing, the cattle that we're producing. Whoever's selling the carcass, unlike other things that we produce, you've got to sell the whole thing, and this is something that people very often forget. And you know, when I'm saying sell the whole thing, it's easy to sell the hindquarters and the mince, but there's an awful lot else to sell. There's the heads, the tails, the tongues, the feet, and it's important that people understand this, that it's quite a complicated thing, and people talk in the trade about whole carcass utilisation and the importance of selling every bit. If I was to tell you that up to about 10 years ago, the meat industry was probably only selling 30 or 40% of the carcass organically, and the rest was going into the conventional sector, particularly the forequarter meat, the mince. But I have to say the abattoirs have improved dramatically. And I mean, most abattoirs now would be selling, you know, up to 70% of the carcass organically, which is a sort of massive improvement, and has sort of helped the price and helped the whole industry, and helped the product, the carcass, helped the carcass from the processor's point of view. You know, if they can get the bulk of the thing away organically at better prices, then obviously that sort of works and brings it all together. From a producer's point of view, there are basically three ways that you can sell your stock, your finished stock. There are through the what I could call the conventional methods, through major abattoirs, largely Irish-owned corporations. You could sell yourself direct to retailers and other wholesalers, people that do box schemes, or you could sell it yourself. I'll just run through the three methods of selling your cattle briefly. It is important the advantages, or the facts really, that surround selling to the big corporations are that it's convenient. It takes less time. It's pretty well hassle-free. It's pretty well within certain confines, pretty well regulated. They tend to be staffed with MLC graders who supervise the weighing of the cattle. And you do have a regular outlet. I mean, abattoirs, the major abattoirs will take cattle, you know, all year, 52 weeks of the year, 51 weeks of the year, they will take cattle in. And that's, you know, for a biggish farm with low labour staffing is also a difficulty. That is a hell of an advantage. The other thing that can be said over the major abattoirs, and it's a brutally important fact, you do always get paid, and I'm slightly touching wood when I'm saying that. So, you know, considering all those things, that is how I would describe selling through the major outlets. Selling direct to retailers and other wholesalers, it's a fairly small section of the numbers of cattle that are marketed, fairly small numbers, but I mean, there are a lot of things to say about it really. You may get a better price. You can build up a good loyalty with the people you're dealing with. You can build up a good reputation, particularly if you're selling to a local butcher. It becomes known that you're supplying the cattle, but generally butchers and small retail outlets, they only take relatively small numbers. I mean, if you can get a butcher to take 1 or 2 a week, he would be in a fairly big way. I know of somebody in Lancashire who takes six a fortnight, and that's a big operation. So they do tend to be fairly small numbers. They can be as well fairly inconsistent over the numbers of cattle they need in. Obviously, during the Christmas kill, you know, they need big numbers, there's other periods of time when they're not so consistent in the numbers they can take in. But nevertheless, it's an opportunity to sell locally, to sell to some very worthwhile outlets and build up your own reputation in the sort of area. The final thing is selling it yourself. And what I mean by this is having the cattle slaughtered at an abattoir and setting up your own farm shop, or selling it on a box scheme, or selling it to your friends. I do get a lot of people who ring me up here for advice on this, and I always give advice with a certain amount of caution and emphasise the point that doing it this way needs an awful lot of planning. It doesn't work straight away. I've tried it myself. The dilemma that exists with the whole carcass utilisation exists even more when you're trying to sell the product yourself. You've got to get rid of everything. Certainly freezing meat is a no-brainer. Once you freeze it, you take the value out of it, as any abattoir will tell you. It can be difficult, and it was mentioned earlier, it can be difficult and inconvenient to get a local abattoir to slaughter the stock. Getting people with butchery skills can be difficult, and it is very time consuming. But nevertheless, the people that plan it properly and make it work do make a success of it. But there are a number of casualties, I can tell you. And I tried it myself and it didn't work. I just ended up being stuck with a lot of meat that I couldn't sell. So I would emphasize, if you're going to try selling it yourself, great, but just plan it as rigorously as you can, and be aware that it will take some time to build up your custom. Really, just to talk briefly about store cattle, which is what I'm personally involved with. We market somewhere in the region of 4,000 organic store cattle a year from everywhere in the country, because organic cattle are so sparsely spread about. I mean, we've had organic cattle from the Orkney Islands. In January, we had 2 lorry loads of organic hill cattle from Fort William. And we've got cattle at the moment booked in Kent, Cornwall, throughout the UK. I mentioned earlier that the breeds are 90% beef, native bred cattle. When I started working for OLMC 20 years ago, it was more like 50% native bred and 50% continental bred. And I think the swing has been a good thing. I think producers have recognised the need for more forage-based, for more breeds of cattle that can make use of forage more effectively. And I'm a big advocate of crossbreeding cattle myself to get the maximum efficiency out of the cattle. 75% of the UK suckler herd is spring calving. In the organic sector, it's more like 90%. And this is sort of quite significant in the whole growth cycle of the animal, and the fact that it's very forage based. So, I mean, just to go through the life cycle of an animal that's born in the spring, born February, May.
Sorry, can I just jump in a second? We're just eating in a little bit into the Q&A time, so if we can just want to make this point and then we'll start answer some questions.
I see we are, Tabitha, and I did say I could talk all day about organic beef.
It's all right. I was busy listening and then suddenly realised the time.
I'll just go through this very quickly and then finish off. I mean, just to say really that in the first year the animal's born, they're generally too small to sell. So if they're spring born, they're generally too small to sell in the autumn. The opportunities to sell organic store cattle really start off in about December through to May, when they're 300 to 400 kilos old, and it's 300 to 400 kilos of age, becoming 12 months old. and big enough to sell onto graziers. The next time there is significant opportunity to sell them is when they get to 400 or 500 kilos at the end of the summer, the end of the second summer, and they're sold on to finishers, and they're finished either housed or out at grass. I mentioned earlier about dairy bred calf being used in organic beef production, and at the moment that makes up 30% of what we market. It has challenges in itself in that the dairy cow, whether it be a Frisian, Holstein, Fleck V, Normandy, Norwegian Red, or whatever, tends to be late maturing. So even if you've got a native bred bull on it, they tend to be more late maturing than early maturing. But I believe the viability of this will mean that it's something that's used more and more. I just finally say, Tabitha, and I'll wrap it up at this really, that the important thing with all of this is planning. I can't emphasize the importance of planning in terms of your breeding of the cattle, planning in terms of feed management, usage, growth rates, and particularly marketing. I mean, for a suckler cow producer who's got, say, 200 cows and he's got 170 calves to sell a year, whether it be finished or as stores, the progeny of those cows, in a lot of cases, is the only source of income, or virtually the only source of income to the farm. So it is absolutely vital that that producer plans very carefully on the marketing and the production of those calves to maximise their returns. Tabitha, sorry, I've gone on too long. That's all I've got to say.
That's great. Thank you, Peter. And obviously you started late because I had gone on too long as well, so I can't be angry at you. If the rest of our speakers can turn their cameras back on and stuff, and I will run through the questions that we've got. We probably will answer the questions that we've got. If anybody's got any more, please do put them in the Q&A or the chat. If you're out of time and need to head off, we will share the recording round afterwards, or if you want to stay and ask questions, then I'm sure our speakers can stay for a couple of minutes over the time. So I'll start with the first question that we've got in the Q&A. So Annie, I think this came in while you were doing your session. And the question is, am I correct in thinking that fully converted organic stock can graze on land that is going through its 2-year organic conversion period up to a percentage of annual dry matter intake? Oh, you're on mute at the moment.
Hi, yeah, sorry. So let me just read the question again. So fully converted organic stock can graze on land that's going through its 2-year organic conversion period. Yeah, so there are percentages of annual dry matter intake that you can graze up to, and I do know this, but I'm having a brain fart. Tom, just come in if you're there to just
jump in. It's quite a lot of numbers to hold in my head. Then, but if we can certainly share them later.
Yeah, so it's a 20% of first year in conversion feed. But
there we go. Tom's chucked it on.
Oh, has Tom chucked it on?
Yeah, 20% during year 1 and 100% during year 2.
Exactly.
And you've enabled my microphone, thank you. But yeah, it must be from your own holding, i.e. the land must be listed on your organic licence.
Yeah. That probably makes quite a big difference there, doesn't it, Tom? So it's not, it needs to be on your licence.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Then we had a few questions come up in the chat as we were going through. Let me try and get to the first one, which I think recording got answered, so that's fine. Peter Whitby, sorry, I know that this is a question that we've been discussing before, and Jerry and I have discussed it at length and where we're going to go next with it. Anybody wants to share an opinion on this? How can you incorporate organic cattle into a conversion conservation grazing contracts? The ground that they're conservation grazing isn't converted. Is there any way that organic cattle can be used to graze it? which it might be an offline conversation again, but it's just the thinking behind that, either Tom or Annie or Adrian, about kind of what the limitations are there, I suppose.
I would just say the economics of any form of land holding at the moment are in flux, and I think that maybe that state of flux would focus the minds of the owners of charities about the validity of getting organic status for their ground. So I think it's something which is going to evolve in terms of the policy environment. Are these in England?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I think it's something that we need to take back to, say, World Wildlife and find out the Wildlife Trust, sorry, and find out what Wildlife Trust policies now is in relation to SSI management, for instance. That might have a bearing on this, and we're seeing them on the 11th, so I can ask them then.
Yeah.
I'll pick up on that a little bit because we've talked about this, obviously, Tabitha.
Yes.
And also Peter. They don't have to convert. You could have the land under your license. So that is one way around it. If you've got a long-term agreement to be able to graze that ground, then you can bring it onto your license as in conversion land and then use the ruling as from the previous question. So there are ways around it. It just needs a negotiation and an agreement with you and the owner. And so there are ways it can be. I'm not saying we're around it. That sounds like we're being dodgy. There are ways that we can talk way through, Tom, as you know. And Tom, do you want to add into that as well?
I was just going to say, Jerry, that the other side of the coin, if you like, from the Wildlife Trust or whoever's perspective, is that when land is organic, there is a dispensation to be able to graze that land for up to 120 days per calendar year with non-organic livestock. So that might
work the other way around.
Bring a bit more flex into that as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things, if I remember correctly in Peter's situation, it's maybe just quite short agreements, but it's maybe that's the solution, that actually a longer agreement for that conservation grazing would allow it to go onto your own license and then manage it that way. But we will get back in touch, Peter, and we can kind of pick up and can continue that conversation about what's the best way to do it. The next question, which I think Peter Jones may have answered a little bit as we're going, but if any opinions on it from the speakers, which indigenous or native breeds tend to commonly used in organic beef systems? So I suppose there's quite a few that are commonly used, but which ones do you find the best?
I think it would be wrong to isolate one as being the best, but I can tell you that the most commonly used is Angus. Stabilizer is probably becoming the second. Other than that, I don't have any figures. Red Devon's very popular, but I think it's unwise to say that one breed is better than the other. Different breeds suit different systems, suit different grazing patterns. I mean, certainly in the Highlands of Scotland, you wouldn't want stabilizers of 1,500 feet up, but you could well have Murray Grey cross Shiltons up there. But I think it would be wrong to sort of isolate one breed as better than another, really.
Thanks, Peter. Gus, do you want to come in on this about kind of how you've got to the breed? Obviously, you're saying you're using majority Angus, but you are crossing in with Hereford and stuff. So how did you get there?
Right. Well, we got there through changing the system from we were a heavily continental-based herd, breeding heavily muscled animals, and then moved to natives. But what I would say, if you breed specific, there is if you go to the Angus breed, which we're using, there is more variation within the breed than what I would say there is between breeds. So I'd be very careful just to assume that because it's an Aberdeen Angus, it would do the job that you're looking for. Because there is breeders who've gone all out for growth, and some Aberdeen Anguses are competing along with Charolais and other breeds on growth, right the way down to your very, very traditional native bred Angus. So there's take time to make the right choices within the breed if you do go for it, because I would say that there is a huge variation within them, more so than between breeds.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. We're in Angus's ourselves at home, and yeah, our pedigree Anguses are very different to others available in the market and stuff. I think what point that really highlights is looking, if you're buying stock or looking for your stock bulls and things, is looking at the system they're coming from as well, because obviously there is things like EBVs and stuff, but there is aspects to the system that will make a difference to how that's going to then perform on your farm and what the kind of the condition of the animal is and how they've got there. So it is very much worth looking at kind of visiting the farm, seeing how they're being produced and stuff, and how that's then gonna work within your system. I had another question here about tree species and hedgerow planting and stuff from a nutritional perspective. So there's a variety. There is some really handy resources on this. There's a database that we can share in the follow-up email and stuff specifically for trees. Obviously, it depends a little bit on where they're grown and the species within the trees, but things like willows, very good, very high in cobalt. Hazel's quite good for copper, which I know is like cobalt and copper in terms of British soils, we're pretty low in. And particularly in cattle, I get a lot of questions about copper. There is copper supplements that you can use within organic, but there's a lot of variation between the success of that and how well it is. So things like hazel are good for copper. There's trees like aspen that is pretty resilient. It's got some issues with pests and stuff depending on where you are, but it's very palatable, so the livestock really like eating aspen. It's a bit like eating chocolate, but it's quite high in protein and has a decent magnesium quantity in it as well. So there is quite a variety. Like with your grazing, it's good to have that variety in, and you just need to be careful how you're managing that, whether they've got how much access they've got and whether you can limit the browse if you need to, because for some things they will gorge a little bit, or until they get used to the availability of that sort of thing, then that makes a difference to their behaviour. But we have got a lot more work going on, and we're soon to launch or relaunch a learning network around trees for kind of livestock nutrition and livestock health and stuff. So keep an eye out for that, because we will be doing more work on that. Have we got, I think that's all the questions that we had submitted at the moment. We are a few minutes over. If anybody didn't have any or didn't get answers to questions or had questions that they didn't get round to asking, please do send them on. We'll send a follow-up email with a lot of the details and the recording and stuff of what we did today. There is a feedback form just linked in the chat there. If you could just fill that in, it just helps us moving forward with how we are running events and stuff and whether you found useful. And I will just share the last slide of the presentation that I had here again, which is just with upcoming events and the QR code for that feedback form. But otherwise, I would like to say thank you very much to Angus and Peter and Adrian and Annie for speaking on today's webinar. And thank you for all those that were able to attend and stayed with us until the bitter end. I'm very grateful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.